begins. Paris burns. The sky is black with smoke, and on the banks of the Seine, men in chainmail scream orders that no one can hear anymore. The wooden bridge collapses under the weight of fire, and in the freezing water, corpses float with eyes wide open. At the center of the chaos, there is a man so large he cannot fit on a horse. Rollo, the walker. The world knows his strength, but not his hunger. They say he was loyal. They say he fought beside his brother, but that is only the part they tell, because the truth about Rollo doesn't fit in any saga. He wasn't the hero who protected his people. He was the traitor who traded his blood for a title, the Viking who knelt before a Christian king, the brother who chose Paris instead of Kattegat. His story is not about honor, it's about hunger, the hunger that transforms men into monsters and monsters into dukes. Rollo didn't want to be remembered. He wanted to be immortal. And for that, he needed to kill everything he was. His body is enormous, but the shadow he casts is even larger. The Franks fear him. The Vikings don't trust him. And him, he knows he will never be truly accepted anywhere. So Rollo does what no Viking would dare. He betrays, converts, marries, rules. He doesn't topple a kingdom. He becomes one. But there is something that neither the title nor the land nor the baptism can erase: the memory of the man he left behind, the brother, and the oath that was never paid. If you want to see how far a man will go when he chooses power over everything, hit that like button and subscribe, because what comes next will show you why some monsters win. But to understand how a Viking became a duke, we need to go back to the cold, to the sea, to the blood that ran in the same veins. Rollo was born somewhere in Scandinavia. No one knows exactly where. It could have been Norway. It could have been Denmark. What matters is what he didn't have: name, land, future. He was the second son. And in the Viking world, that meant nothing. The older brother, Ragnar, according to some sagas, would inherit everything: the farm, the respect, the place in the memory of the ancestors. Rollo would inherit the shadow, and he grew up inside it, silent, enormous, watching. From childhood, he was different, bigger than the other boys, stronger, but also slower to speak, more uncomfortable at feasts, more distant in his gaze. People laughed at him. They called him Gongu Hrolfa, Rollo, the walker, because no horse could carry his weight without breaking. He walked always, and while he walked, something inside him fermented. His father was a warrior, but not a legend. His mother was hard, like all women of the north, but neither of them saw Rollo. They saw the brother, the faster one, the smarter one, the favorite of the gods. And Rollo learned to carry shields, to row until his arms bled, to kill without hesitation, because at sea, size matters, strength matters, and he had both. But what he didn't have was love. The first raids came early. Rollo embarked as a teenager with an axe he could barely lift. But in the first battle, something changed. He didn't feel fear. He felt hunger. Hunger to prove he was worth more than his brother. Hunger to be seen. Hunger for power. The Vikings raided monasteries, villages, fortresses along the coast of Francia, and Rollo was always at the front line, not from courage, but from desperation. Because there, in the chaos, in the blood, in the plunder, he finally existed. But the glory always went to the brother. The sagas sang Ragnar's name. Men drank in his honor. And Rollo drank alone. And that blood oath they made one day, to fight side by side until Valhalla, it began to weigh like iron on his chest. Because Rollo realized something no skald would ever sing: loyalty doesn't feed, honor doesn't build kingdoms, and brothers die forgotten if they remain in the shadow. So he made a choice, not immediate, not conscious, but inevitable. He decided he would not be anyone's right hand, not Ragnar's, not the gods, not fate's. He would be the fist itself. And that's how, not in childhood, but in the silent humiliation of 20 years, the monster began to be born. The moment Rollo stopped being a shadow was the day he saw Paris, not the Paris of stone and gold that would come later, the besieged Paris, surrounded, desperate. It was 885 AD. Hundreds of Viking ships blocked the Seine like a wall of wood and iron. The Franks trembled behind their towers, and Rollo was there, not as a leader, not yet, but as the weapon everyone feared to unleash. He carried a two-handed axe, forged especially for his size. The blade was so wide it could split a man in half from collarbone to hip with a single blow, and he he did it many times. The Franks called the Vikings Nordmen, men of the north, demons of the sea. But when they saw Rollo advance, they had another name, Leviathan, because he didn't fight like a man. He fought like a force of nature, without haste, without screaming, just methodical, brutal, silent destruction. He broke gates with his shoulders, ripped spears from enemies' hands, and used them as hammers. When he entered a shield wall, it simply disappeared. And it was there, in the siege of Paris, that something began to change. The Viking chiefs began to listen to him, not because he spoke well, he barely spoke, but because no one wanted to be on the opposite side of him. Rollo realized something devastating. Fear is power, and he generated fear like other men generated respect. But there was a problem. Ragnar was still the name in the songs. Ragnar was still the strategist. Rollo was the muscle, the enforcer, the tamed monster, and that was not enough. So Rollo began to observe the Franks, not as a Viking observes, looking for weakness to invade, but as a predator observes, looking for where to live. He saw castles, he saw titles, he saw lands that belonged to families for generations, protected by written oaths, not just by force. He saw weak men commanding strong armies because they had legitimacy. And Rollo understood he would never be king in Scandinavia. There, he would always be someone's brother. But here the Franks were afraid, and fear can be negotiated. That's when the plan began to take shape. Not a battle plan, a plan of betrayal. But he needed one last Viking victory before he stopped being a Viking. In the year 911, after decades of raiding, burning, besieging, Rollo led a final attack on the Seine Valley. This time, he wasn't under anyone's orders. He was the fleet. The Franks could no longer stop him. Their cities burned, their harvests were ash, and King Charles the Simple knew there was no army capable of defeating Rollo in open field. So Charles did something no Christian king had ever done. He offered Rollo what he always wanted. Not gold, not slaves, land, title, immortality. All Rollo needed to do was kneel and swear allegiance to the Christian God and marry the king's daughter and abandon the gods of his fathers and never attack Francia again. Was it betrayal? Yes. Was it intelligent? Absurdly so, because Rollo realized what few Vikings could see. The gods don't give lands. Kings do. The Treaty of Saint-Clair sur Epte was signed in 911 AD, but what happened there was not diplomacy. It was surrender masked as power. Charles the Simple, king of the Franks, had no choice. Rollo had burned everything around Paris. His fleets controlled the Seine as if the river were theirs, and the Frankish army, exhausted, defeated, scared. So Charles offered the impossible: lands, title, legitimacy, an entire region north of Francia, what would come to be called Normandy, land of the Northmen, all Rollo's, forever. But the price: Rollo would have to kneel. He would have to kiss the king's foot. He would have to be baptized. He would have to swear before bishops and nobles that he abandoned Odin, Thor, Freya, all the gods his people had worshipped for 1,000 years. He would have to marry Gisela, daughter or granddaughter of Charles, and become a vassal of the kingdom. It was humiliation, or was it genius? Rollo knew his men were watching. Some Vikings followed him there because they trusted him, others because they feared him. But now he would ask them to do the unthinkable, give up everything they had fought for. The ceremony took place in a church. The smell of incense suffocated the air. Strange smell, Christian, civilized. Rollo entered in Viking armor, axe on his belt, long braided hair. The bishops trembled when they saw him. Charles tried to seem dignified, but his fear was visible. Rollo approached the throne. Everyone expected him to kneel, but he stopped and stood for long seconds, just staring. What went through his mind at that moment? He thought of his brother. He thought of the promises they had made when they were still young. He thought of the shared blood, the battles side by side, the oaths under the stars of the north. And then he thought of everything the brother had, and he didn't. Glory, saga, love, destiny. Rollo never had destiny. He had hunger. And now, finally, he had the chance to be something beyond shadow. So he knelt. The hall fell silent. The Vikings Vikings present didn't believe it. Some spat on the floor, others turned their backs and left, but Rollo didn't look back. He swore allegiance to Charles. He swore to protect Francia against other Vikings. He swore to serve the Christian God. And when the bishop poured holy water over his enormous head, something inside Rollo died. But something greater was born. He was no longer Rollo the Walker. Now he was Robert, Duke of Normandy, Lord of lands, founder of dynasty. But the betrayal was not yet complete, because a few years later, Rollo did the unthinkable. When new Vikings attacked Francia, Vikings who had fought beside him, who knew him, who trusted him, Rollo massacred them. He led Frankish armies against his own blood brothers. He used Viking tactics against Vikings. He knew every move of theirs, every weakness, every ritual before battle, and he used all of that to destroy them. On the banks of the Seine, where he had once besieged Paris as an invader, now he defended it as lord. The Vikings who tried to plunder his new lands were received not with hospitality, but with steel. Rollo didn't hesitate. He showed no mercy. He hanged them. He drowned them. He burned them alive in their own ships. Why? Because he understood the only rule of power. Divided loyalty is dead loyalty. If he wanted to be duke, truly, he couldn't be Viking. If he wanted to protect his lands, he couldn't protect his people. If he wanted immortality, he would have to kill the man he was. And he killed him. The Vikings fled. The Franks applauded him. And Charles finally understood he had done something genius or monstrous. He had transformed Francia's greatest enemy into its most loyal guard dog. But Rollo was not a dog. He was a domesticated wolf. And wolves never forget the taste of blood. In the following years, Rollo ruled Normandy with an iron fist. He Christianized his men, some voluntarily, others by force. He built churches where there had once been altars to Odin. He traded spears for plows, Vikings for knights, sagas for scrolls. He married Gisela. He had children. He founded cities. He created laws. But he never returned to the north. He never saw his brother again. He never set foot in Kattegat again. He never again heard the sound of waves hitting the hull of a drakkar while rowing to war, because Rollo had chosen power instead of blood, immortality instead of honor, Normandy instead of Valhalla, and that childhood oath to fight beside his brother until death. It was never paid. In fact, it was broken. Rollo died old, not in battle, not with an axe in his hand, but in a bed, in lands he conquered, by trading everything he was. The year was around 930 AD. He was nearly 70 years old, an eternity for a Viking. His hair, once blonde and braided, was now white and short, cut in the Frankish fashion. His body, once a weapon of war, was now heavy, slow, marked by decades of decisions that could never be undone. And in those last days, something strange happened. According to Frankish accounts, and this may be legend, but legends always carry truth, Rollo ordered altars to be built, not only to Christ, but also to Odin. He sacrificed prisoners to the Norse gods. Then he ordered Christian masses to be said. He donated gold to churches and offered blood to the ancestors. Why? Because in the end, Rollo no longer knew who he was. He was no longer Viking. He had betrayed his people, killed his brothers, renounced his gods. But he was also not Frank. He was never truly accepted, never spoke the language perfectly, never erased his northern accent. He was both and neither. A divided man, a giant who never fit anywhere. Not in Valhalla, not in paradise. When Rollo closed his eyes for the last time, no one knows what he saw. Perhaps his brother's face, perhaps the Seine in flames, perhaps the crown he never had but that his descendants would have. Because that blood oath, it was never paid, but it was collected. Generations later, Rollo's sons became dukes, his grandsons kings, and in 1066, 150 years after the betrayal, William the Conqueror, Rollo's great-great-grandson, invaded England and became king. The same England that Vikings had attacked for centuries, the same England that had resisted Norse invasions forever, fell into the hands of a Viking descendant, not with drakkars, not with axes, but with Norman knights, Frankish armor, and a legitimacy that Rollo had bought with betrayal. This is Rollo's legacy. He was not a hero. He was not loyal. He was not honorable, but he was immortal. Today, the veins of European royalty carry Rollo's blood. England, France, Spain, Russia, all these crowns descend in some way from that enormous Viking who chose baptism instead of Valhalla, Valhalla. The Viking poets never sang his name. The sagas treated him as a traitor, but kings call him ancestor and the brother. Ragnar became legend. He died in England, according to some stories, thrown into a pit of serpents. His death was epic, his saga immortal, but his sons, they died fighting. His lands conquered by others. His name remembered in stories, but not on thrones. Rollo, on the other hand, built a kingdom. He didn't win because he was strong. He won because he understood something few warriors understand. Power is not conquered only with blood. It is conquered with choice. The choice to betray, the choice to kneel, the choice to kill the man you were, to become the man no one imagined. This is Rollo, not the hero of the series, not the loyal warrior of the sagas, but the real man, the divided giant, the Viking who became duke, the brother who chose power instead of blood and paid the price every day until his last breath. If you want to descend deeper into the minds of men who betrayed everything to conquer immortality, subscribe to the channel, because the real story is never about heroes. It's about monsters who won.